Welcome to iConnect, a podcast from Ocular Melanoma UK, where real people share real stories about life with and beyond this and other rare cancers. Ocular Melanoma UK knows just how powerful it can be to hear from others who truly understand the journey. From laughter to loss, science to support, each episode connects voices from across the ocular melanoma community. iConnect, bringing together people and stories. Today on iConnect, we're talking about something many of us quietly avoid, planning for the future, especially when life feels so uncertain. I'm joined by Caro Syson, founder of Your Final Matters, and Jason Short, a wills specialist. Two people who believe that putting plans in place doesn't have to be frightening, clinical, or full of legal jargon. Instead, it can be kind, practical, and even reassuring. Together, they help individuals and families have the conversations that feel so hard to start about wishes, care, and what really matters, so that when life does throw the unexpected, there's less panic and more peace of mind. This is a gentle, honest conversation about control, clarity, and doing one small thing today that can make a big difference to tomorrow. Hello to you both, and thank you so much for joining me.
Good afternoon. Nice to meet you.
Lovely to be here.
Thank you. Caro, Jason, Caro first. Could you just explain to our audience what it is you would class yourself as and what exactly your business does for people?
Absolutely. So yes, I'm Caro Syson and I run Your Final Matters. So I talk about death and money all in the same sentence. Those are the two topics that people find very difficult to sort of, I think they're the last sort of taboos. People don't talk about money and especially not around death. So I think Your Final Matters are, it's a practical in-person education and planning experience, really. I think it helps people to get their later life, their end of life affairs organised while they've still got capacity and choice. And it's not advice giving, not like Jason does. I don't sell or recommend any products, but I try and help people to understand what they need and have a joined up approach, really. That's kind of the best way. I am an independent funeral celebrant as well. So not just legal and financial things. We don't just talk about those on the workshop, but we also talk about funeral wishes and also understanding the probate process. So it's kind of all-encompassing areas that I cover, really, around later life and end of life planning.
Okay, fabulous. I've got so many questions for you, but I'm just going to let Jason introduce himself.
Yeah.
Jason, tell us about you.
Yeah, I'm Jason Short. I'm the principal owner and partner of Buckinghamshire Wills Trusts. And as the title says, you know, we specialise in writing last will and testaments, lasting powers of attorney, severance of tenancy agreements. So legal matters, legal documents.
Excellent. I've brought you both here today because I don't think society is geared up for the what you offer. I think we all get to a point in our lives quite often when it's too late and someone else is left to do all the dog work and the groundwork, and it makes it too difficult. People get diagnosed with stuff, but the one thing we all know from the minute we're born is that we're going to die. And it might sound really morbid, but actually, why not be in a better position and have things sorted out for you? So, I mean, Caro, what led you to create Your Final Matters?
So I think it started, I've got a 91-year-old, very fit and healthy mother, and she's on her own. And I've been helping her manage her estate, really, while she's alive. I've done everything from inheritance tax planning, overseeing her pension. We have done her funeral wishes. Her will has been done recently. We've got powers of attorney. And as I say, the funeral, when I actually discussed it with her, I would have done something completely different to what she actually would have liked. She always says, "Oh, what do people do if they don't have a Caro?" And I said, I don't know. I think everyone's got somebody that they can talk to. She said, well, my friends don't. Would you help them with this? Would you help them with that? I've worked in financial services. I've worked in the NHS, in lots of different areas. And it's enabled me to sort of have an overview. I have this large umbrella view of all the aspects that people need. And I realized it fitted into something which I've now developed as a 5-step framework, which helps people have this joined up approach. I think as you start to speak to each individual expert that I have on the workshops, the specialist in wills and powers of attorney, someone else that talks about equity release, also a probate expert. And when you start to unpack each of those specialist areas, you realize that you need to understand what each of those other professionals are doing. You can't write a will in isolation without knowing if somebody might have plans for equity release at a later stage, because that would change how Jason might choose a trust or some sort of particular aspect of his will. And, you can have the most elaborate inheritance tax planning, but if nobody knows about it, then it's of no use and benefit. And all of the things that I help people to put in place prior to them passing away all makes that process of probate so much simpler for our loved ones, because nobody wants to leave our loved ones in chaos, in confusion, and God forbid conflict after we've gone. And it's hard to talk about, death and money when somebody brings up money, with a parent or whatever. The parents' often response is like, "Oh, you just want to get your hands on my money," type thing. But often they're wanting to have clarity around provision and plans. And so I help people get those ducks in a row. I'm completely autonomous. Anyone can be used. It's not about specific people. I just want people to have those conversations, to consider all of these really important decisions when their back isn't up against the wall, when they have got good health, when they're calm, they haven't got a diagnosis or something hanging over them, because that's the best time to make these decisions.
Perfect. Jason, that kind of to bring you in, obviously your roles complement each other. So, I've got a question. Do you have an average age of your clientele? Do people come to you when they're about to slip off the plate? Or are we actually gradually, as a society, realizing that this needs to be sorted when we're a little bit younger? People, I don't know. Do you have a will under the age of 18? Do you have any clients who are children even?
Well, you can have a will actually under the age of 18, but there's special circumstances around that. And that's only if you're in the military and you're going into a war zone, an active conflict, and that's at 17. But general rule of thumb is over 18. I'd say I'm writing more lasting powers of attorney now for the under 30s, and that's because they've grown up through COVID, and that's brought that into their, foresight now.
Could you explain to those that don't understand what a lasting power of attorney, also known as an LPA, is? Could you just give it a quick...
First of all, with a lasting power of with a will, let's start with a will. A will is post-death. So that's going to deal with your life after you've passed away, where a lasting power of attorney is going to look after you during your life. And you're expected to recover with a lasting power of attorney. So there's two of them. There's a health and welfare, and there's a property and finance. So obviously each looks after a specific area of your life. But if we stick with health and welfare, let's say, so with health and welfare, you're putting your best health in the hands of somebody else. Now that somebody else is called an attorney, and you want that to be somebody who knows you incredibly well. In many instances, that's going to be your partner, your husband, your wife. It can be your parents, of course, and it can be your best friend, but you are probably more open with your spouse than you would be with your parents. And that's to say, your parents know you as a child, but not necessarily as well when you're an adult. When you become married, that partner knows you inside out as an adult. So they're there specifically to make sure that in health and welfare circumstances, that if it was a life-sustaining treatment, sadly, if it's going to go that far, if you're in a coma, then your wishes would be carried out. Now, your wishes could be that you don't want to be resuscitated, or it could be that as simple as if you're in a coma, you want something specific, like you need. I've had one recently where a couple actually was so specific they asked for their teeth to be brushed 3 times a day for 3 minutes each. It really can be as specific as that. Now, I did
Wow.
actually explain to them that that is probably pushing the bounds of, a reasonable expectation, but it still was put in there because that
Okay.
was very important to them. So
That's
they
that's
are
kind of
very
really sweet, actually. That's adorable.
well. It is, especially when you consider that the person's actually going to, be in a coma potentially, and
Yeah.
therefore not even know their teeth has been cleaned. But it's that you can be as specific as you want. I prefer to advise them to be as broad as you can be, not
Yeah.
honed in. The broader, the better, because you are asking your attorney, who knows you better than anybody, okay, to make decisions to best suit you. And if you're putting something in a lasting power of attorney, it has to be carried out.
Okay. So
Okay.
I presume if a person was to lose mental capacity
Yeah.
as well, that's when the attorney kicks in to be able to take over any serious decisions involving your health and well-being.
It is, but you can also have a lasting power of attorney written so it becomes immediately live. It's immediately valid. It doesn't have to be just when you've lost mental capacity. So if you have a lasting power of attorney, let's say property and welfare, and let's assume you're on a cruise somewhere in the middle of the Atlantic and nobody can get hold of you. Not a cruise ship because they have internet. Let's assume it's a small boat. You're rowing across the Atlantic, bless you. You're giving it your best shot. And they use your credit card. Your spouse back on land uses your credit card. Now, it's okay for them to do that under the rules that they have spoken to you, contact you, you have their verbal permission to do so. But if you haven't got that permission without a lasting power of attorney, it can be seen as you taking money from their account illegally. So
Okay.
you've got to be quite specific about, most people nowadays would say you would allow that person to have permission as soon as the lasting power is done. That doesn't mean to say that they can now steal money from your bank account and go and buy themselves a sports car.
So
Because
I'm just sitting here thinking, right, I'll be back in a bit.
because there are very tight rules regulating what they can and can't spend money on.
Okay.
Okay. So they can only do what you would have done yourself had you been allowed to do that, make your own decisions on your own behalf.
Okay.
It's unlikely they would have said, yeah, I'm going to row the Atlantic and buy yourself a Ferrari. So
This is quite unlikely. So these conversations probably then end up with well, have you got a will? I would imagine. And how do you both, Jason first and then Caro, how do you both describe your approach to that as kind but practical? Because it's a future planning event and people just don't like talking about death. It's such a taboo subject.
it is. Well, wills kind of force people to imagine loss of control, and people like to feel as though they're in control. So with a will, you're kind of handing over that somebody else is going to be making decisions on your post-life, post-death. Now, that in some instances can be quite comforting. For other people, it can be quite scary because you're no longer in control of your own ship. You're no longer the captain in, steering your own fortunes going forward. So you've handed over to your executors and your who are the people that are going to administer your will. They're the people that are going to make sure that what you've requested in your will is carried out. And if that is a trust, then of course you've got your trustees to look after how the beneficiaries are going to receive their money or their inheritance. But in respect of writing a will, take your time, listen to what they're saying, but also listen to what they're not saying. So if you've got, for example, 3 children and they're only talking about 2, and there are only 2 beneficiaries they're mentioned, you need to ask the question really, what happened to the third? Is there an issue? Because is this will potentially going to be challenged? Is it going to get to probate and stall? So it's listening very carefully. If they've made the decision to talk to you, it means they're ready to discuss it and to be open about a conversation. And not everybody wants to be very personal, although sadly you do need to be. So it's really a case of being able to encourage them to give you that information.
Okay, and Caro, you probably normalise that fear and soften the topic. You help people talk about the wills in your workshop and funerals and wishes without the doom and gloom.
Yeah,
So,
I
what's
think
something that people think is sorted but usually isn't, and how do you normalise this?
so. My understanding is there's around 27 million people in the UK that don't have wills at the moment. It's a huge number, and
Okay.
you know, also that don't have LPAs. And I try and gently explain, it shouldn't be the cost that is stopping you from doing these things. Quite often, people are in conflict at home because they can't work out what they want. Often we have blended families these days, so we have children from previous marriages, or we've got married a second or a third time, and so that can also add a layer of complexity. And I think it's where people are reluctant to talk about it while they're still living, to actually say that, I'd like you to have it, but I want the children to benefit ultimately from half of the house, and you can stay in
Mm.
it until you pass away. And those sorts of things are perfectly normal feelings to have, but it might create conflict between a couple in a relationship to actually have it physically written down and to have it, you know, sort of set in stone that it's actually in your will. So I think because people have that fear of upsetting the relationship while they're still alive, it can then either not be done, and then it's left to the conflict after they've died, and then it's a complete mess. But that kind of isn't the answer. So I encourage everybody to have these conversations and to consider it, and to, before they even get into Jason's office, to have perhaps drawn out a family tree or something like that, so that
Yeah.
it makes it very simple for Jason to see, well, this is a second marriage, but I've got two children from my first, or he's got a stepdaughter or something, so that Jason can see the dynamics of what there might be in the family, the background, that there could be money coming from a parent that could also need to be ring fenced at, into their estate. But, so many people are reaching the threshold for paying inheritance tax these days. So it's very important that these things are done in conjunction with other people that can also help to protect the estate. But I also talk about powers of attorney being so important because they're relevant while you've still got a pulse, while you're still breathing. So they're actually going to really affect you and impact you enormously. So it's vitally important that you choose the right people. And people are like, oh, it's a lot of form filling. It seems expensive. It's just gone up to, I think is it £92 now to do it if
Correct.
it's a DIY one. And
Yeah.
you have to do two. And if you don't tick a box, it all comes back. And there's a lot of
Yeah.
sequencing for, which is why you often get a professional to do these things for you, because there's a lot of questions to ask and you're not quite sure what they all mean. So that's the value of having a professional. But if you don't have a power of attorney, then if something happens to you, God forbid you're involved in a car accident or you lose capacity, the options then are actually quite staggering, which most people don't have a clue about. You have to go to the Office of Public Guardianship to actually get a deputyship. And that is not a cheap thing. That's definitely not £92.
No.
So the actual cost of not doing it, not just the emotional cost, but the actual physical cost. And once you get to the Office of Public Guardianship and you're saying, I want to be the guardian, I want to be, they don't have to appoint you. It's not down to you to say, well, I'm the obvious candidate. They might actually say, you know what, I think he might be better suited or she might be better suited, which is absolutely in your mind, not the decision that the person would have chosen. So all of these things are all left as an unknown. And I think wasn't it Kate Garraway when her husband
It is,
Derek
yeah.
had COVID?
Yeah.
He was a classic example. They hadn't got powers of attorney set up. And poor Kate was left at sea for a long time getting all those things sorted. So there was a lot of uncertainty, a lot of red tape. She couldn't just go and spend things, do things and pay for things in the way that I think she and Derek had hoped or expected, but they didn't have these provisions in place. And yes, it's a big topic to cover and to consider and to talk about. But the options, if you don't do it, are, I don't like to do fear-based marketing or, setting worries and things. But, you do really need to consider this because life is so unpredictable these days. We leave the house in the morning and there's no guarantee we're going to put that key in the door when we come home that evening. There are so many things and, it isn't an aging population that, you're not protected because you're young, unfortunately. There are lots more things that go on these days that mean many younger people are actually facing consequences of all sorts of things in our environment. So it's really important, whether you're 18 or 88, that you consider what you would like to have happen to yourself and for your loved ones around you, with
Yeah.
both your health and your finances.
It's important to say as well as that with a will, for example, as soon as you've got your will signed and witnessed by two independent people, and it must be independent, there can't be beneficiaries, that as soon as it's signed, it's a live document. That's it. It's done. But with a lasting power of attorney, it can take up to 16 weeks. So it's a long time for that to be registered and approved at the Office of the Public Guardian, or yet the OPG. So it needs planning. You need to think about it in advance, well in advance. This is not a last minute decision. You've got to really think about it and say, right, there's 20 plus pages for each of these documents. They are very specific. You're dead right what Caro says. If you miss a spelling or you're incorrectly worded a sentence, so it's even important how you word it. I must have, I would like. These are all very important beginnings to a sentence that can refute the LPA. They can say, no, I'm sorry, you can't have that in there, or it's in the wrong place. So you
And I
do
think
need
the
to
other
plan.
Sorry, the other thing to just say is once you've got it set up, it's not set in stone. You can revoke it. You can change if somebody seems, if somebody at a later date seems unsuitable and you want to change who's on the LPA or to change your will, you can adjust them and change them at a later date. So it's not forever. They might be forever, but it's really important that you consider carefully who's going to go on it. But if your circumstances change, you can go back and you can revoke it and you can update it. And it's really important that you do look at these things again because, we have lots of life events. Life is fast moving. We do have events that happen. It may be that an executor or an attorney moves away, they go abroad, or, God forbid they pass away or they
Exactly.
lose capacity. So it's really important that you review at important intervals, events like when you get married, if you get divorced, those two things on their own, you have to update your wills and that sort of stuff. Not necessarily if you just move house and you've got a different address, or if a granddaughter moves home, but you might, if you have another child, you will probably want to update the will. So it's not a once and done thing, but it's an important thing. And as Jason says, once the document is live, you've got those safety measures in place, but don't overlook the fact that you can either change it through choice, or you can change it when something happens and a circumstance happens that you should update and review it. So those are the two things that I would suggest.
Now,
Definitely.
there might be people listening thinking, well, I can't afford an independent wills advisor. I can't afford to go on a workshop. I love all your advice, but actually I do have, or I could find that £92 to register my will and at least get something in place. So how can people do this without forking out hundreds and hundreds of pounds? I mean, if somebody gets hit with a diagnosis, for example, and they just think, I just need to get this done, but I need all my money on treatment at the moment, what would be your advice, either of you, to support them in actually making sure that this happens? Does Citizens Advice back you up on stuff like this?
I mean, there are, yeah. I mean, wills actually aren't expensive to write. They're not. Unless you have a very large estate. And the only reason that would be an expensive will is because of the insurance that the solicitors would need to take out. And I'm talking millions and millions of pounds.
Okay.
Generally speaking, if it's, let's assume £500,000 estate, then the cost of a couple of £100 for a will, because they're not expensive things to have in place, and that is a basic will, it can save you. The reason you're doing this, of course, is to save not you, because sadly you've passed away, but your beneficiaries, the people that you care about, the heartache of having to go through the problem of probate. A
Yeah.
well-written will can sometimes bypass a probate.
Yeah.
Depends
So
on the size.
this word probate, somebody dies and they've got a will. stuff still goes into probate. A house would be in probate, or the estate is in probate. I actually believed that once you have a will, probate didn't exist, and you only went through probate because they haven't got a will in place. I didn't realise that probate happened. And I'm
Yeah.
not alone. I did ask
No,
other
no,
people.
probate doesn't happen. And you can, if it's a relatively small estate and a
It's
simple
small
estate, you
estate.
can do the probate yourself. You don't
Yeah.
have to spend money to go through a solicitor to do that. But again, it's all
And
dependent on the
break it
size
down,
and
Jason.
breadth of it.
What is the probate?
Well, Caro, you can answer that.
No, I'll do it with you, Jason, because again, I'm not a probate or an expert on any of these. Probate is basically the legal process of just tying up all of your estate after you've passed away. But there's a very specific order and sequence that things need to be done. And specifically, if you have a large estate, you're likely to have to pay inheritance tax on that. And that can come as quite a big shock for families, particularly if they, haven't realised what the figures are involved and that sort of thing. And before probate is granted, often the amounts of the inheritance tax planning figures have to have been discussed and shared with HMRC. And so all of those things are quite a shock for a lot of people. They presume somebody's passed away, we're grieving, leave us alone, we'll sort it out when we're ready. But there are timelines and there are, procedures and things that have to be followed, because HMRC aren't we'll catch up with you in a few years when you're feeling a bit better after mum or dad's died. That isn't unfortunately the way that it goes. Obviously, if you die without a will, then you die what they call intestate, which means
Right.
that there is a very strict process of who will inherit what. So you may presume that you've lived with Johnny or Sammy, whoever, for all these years, but the law doesn't work like that. So if there are children, if there are different relatives, there's a very specific pecking order and it goes down that way. And that might not be at all what you envisaged. So you might have, tried to avoid, whatever the cost is of doing a will or these powers of attorney while you're still alive, because, you think that you haven't got the money to spend it. But it's just such a costly mistake that will be accrued at a later date, unfortunately. So I would really recommend that, particularly if you've got an estate or anything that's worth over the inheritance tax allowance and those sorts of things, that it's a serious misjudgment of your finances not to consider speaking to an expert or a specialist, because 1 in 5 wills that are done DIY don't stand up and they can be challenged. And then it becomes incredibly costly. It's like 10,000 plus just to get into court to contest a will. And there's never been a time when more wills are being contested. So it's really important that you have that full and frank conversation with an expert will writer to be able to make it really watertight so that your wishes can't be challenged. And as Jason said, if you've got 3 children and you haven't mentioned the third one and you've left them between, children 1 and 2 or whatever, you could well be challenged by child number 3 unless you've really clearly documented what provision you've made previously for them, or specifically why you aren't wanting to include them in the will. And so it will reduce the chances of that challenge being successful. And to have those conversations ahead of time to let them know that it's going to be happening. Sort out and iron out your differences before, if you can.
Yeah.
But it makes it simpler. So, sorry, Jason, anything to add on the probate
No,
part?
that's perfect. I mean, that was a very good explanation, really.
I have a snakes and ladders, because it is a bit like snakes and ladders. I have like everything. I'm quite a visual person. Everything has to be in colour. So I have a snakes and ladders 10-point chart that you go through, a roadmap after for probate, which just helps people check it out.
Yeah.
That's one of the resources I have on the workshop. But all of these things are helping to educate. And this is hugely an educational piece. And that's really the purpose and the passion of me doing the workshops, really, because we talk about the price. There's no getting around, that expert advice does cost money. But, just coming on a workshop, less than 1 hour of a solicitor's time, you can easily waste 3 to 5 hours of a solicitor's time just getting them up to ground zero after somebody has died, if they haven't got basic things in place, because they're on this scavenger hunt looking for things. And one of the staggering figures that I always talk about is £4.5 billion sitting in UK bank accounts that has not been claimed, and is sort of forgotten money because it's not documented and the family don't know where to start. It's never been simpler to open an online bank account these days. You can have bank accounts in all sorts of places and never have a physical paper statement. So how on earth would you know that they had 2 or 3 different bank accounts, maybe a bank account abroad, if there are not some clues? So I just say, just print off something from the bank once a year, pop it in our folder, and then it gives people clues to be able to follow it up. And I share links to help people to go and find lost bank accounts and things. And I have a really good contact that I can share who also has ways and means to be able to go and find people's bank accounts after they passed away. Because this money that might be squirreled away for this rainy day, it was meant to go to their loved ones. And they've worked very hard to have it. So it's such a tragedy that it could get stuck in this £4.5 billion in these bank accounts that these big banks don't need.
Yeah, it's
That's an
extraordinary.
exorbitant amount of money, isn't it? Yeah.
It is. It's extraordinary how many people actually have their will written and then hide it. I mean, it's the most ridiculous thing. And then they hide it, thinking this is personal, private property. I'm going to not tell anybody where I'm going to put it. I mean, it's so ridiculous. You need to, as Caro says, you need to let your executors know. I mean, as a standard
minimum,
tell them, just tell them, and even
I have made a will. This is where it is.
And even send them a copy. They don't necessarily have to open the envelope or anything, but it's the original that is the most important. It needs the wet signature to really stand up in a court of law. So you can't hide it. Just put it somewhere safe. Put it with your other documents, with your other private papers, your bank account statements and things. Absolutely, insurance details. But try and keep everything in the same folder. And Caro probably I supply a folder. I'm sure Caro supplies a folder where you can put everything into it. So it's really obvious to that person that's gone into the deceased person's property, and it's there. It's all in one place.
Just a random question. Are you talking about a physical, like, paper folder and it's got all the paperwork in?
Yeah.
Okay.
I provide
I was going to say, really, really throwing it out there. If your house burnt to the ground, God forbid, with you in it, where's the copy?
I keep a copy, and this is why I said it's important. But you see, that individual, if I've printed the will, and I always keep a copy of every will I've ever written, and it's also stored on a database.
Mm-hmm.
But as you say, if it's burned down, then of course it would revert to the copy. Hopefully you've sent to your executors, explained to them that this is my last will and testament. You're a named executor in it. And this is usually where I've kept it. Now, if the house is burnt down, it will revert to the copy that I've got. Now, that could still be contested because it's not the original, but it's a lot better than having nothing at all.
Yeah. No, it was just a random thought that came into my mind as weird, kind of weird, wonderful things.
On the workshop, I talk right at the get-go about the storage of these important documents. So apart from the folder, I also talk about cloud storage. And that brings us on to one of the other really big topics, which is growing, is your digital legacy. So we all have a digital footprint these days. There's not really very many people that aren't online in some shape or form. Just to function online, we have to have so many different accounts with numerous passwords and all of these sorts of things. And it's becoming a really growing problem for people to, firstly remember their own passwords, and God forbid somebody else might need to access any of these accounts. So I do a whole piece on digital legacy, and one of the things that really sticks with me is I did a workshop at the beginning of this month, and one of the ladies sitting at the front said to me, she said, this really threw me. She said, last week I was on Facebook and this lady came up, suggested friend. She said, I thought, goodness, that's so-and-so. She said she had died 3 years ago and she was still being suggested as a friend because nobody had gone into her settings and been able to be in a position to change and remove her account. And so all of these things, everything from Facebook to Meta to Google, your Apple iPhone, I have also heard stories where people have gone into hospital, with the phone and mum's finger trying to put it on the phone to open the phone, or holding the phone up in front of somebody that's already intubated to try and get the face ID opening on face recognition. These aren't unusual situations because these things haven't been set up correctly. So I teach a way for people to be able to access those things and have legacy contacts and memorializations. And, we have crib sheets, checklists and guides that people can just follow steps to be able to set those up simply. Because my mum's 91, she has an iPad, but I'm set up as the legacy contact, so I will be able to go in legally, because Meta and these big companies, they're faceless companies, and the last thing you need to be doing when someone's passed away is starting to battle with these things. I mean, we've all seen in the media how resistant they are to people that have lost children through different TikTok scams and all of these things. They aren't budging, and it's really important we make provision ahead of time and put things in place in order to manage our digital legacy, which also could include things like cryptocurrency, NFTs, all of these other digital currencies which are happening on the internet and have to be accessed very specifically. Otherwise, you might have bought 5 Bitcoin, 20 years ago. Goodness knows what it will be worth in another 20 years. There's so many aspects, your will and your LPA is just one strand of what we need to make provision for, which is why it's so important that we work in conjunction with other experts and professionals.
So, and aside from your workshop, do you offer like a peace of mind planner or a checklist or something like this? Are these things that are available? I mean, bringing up the digital legacy thing today, and it really brings it home that actually this is for all of us.
Yes, that's right. It's not just for old people. It's not just so I've literally only started Your Final Matters last year. So I've been doing half-day workshops where I just do the workshop on a half day. The new one-day workshop format is where I have 4 guest experts coming in to also talk in more detail about some of the things that I cover. I have a folder, a digital one on the half-day workshop, or a physical one if they come to the full-day workshop. And then there's a 70-page colour workbook, which is editable, which is included on the one-day workshop. What you need to look out for, the 10 questions that you would ask an equity release advisor before you engage somebody like that. 20 myth-busting things about wills and powers of attorneys, and just helpful bits and bobs that really help get your mind going. Pet legacies. Some people, have very specific routines. Their dog has a microchip. They've got a payment plan for monthly pet care, and God forbid something happened to them. They want Jeremy the Chihuahua to be exactly look like this. They want his diet to be this. They want him walked at this time, and they've left provision in their will for Jeremy the Chihuahua to have all of this luxury thing. That's not a joke, is it, Jason?
It absolutely isn't, because a lot of these pets are considered children.
Yes,
and so they genuinely would leave that.
Yeah, so I have a pet legacy section, and we touch on that. It's almost as important as the child legacy. And so these aspects are all things that we have to consider. And it's not just, organ donation. We're opted in automatically. Did you know that? I had a conversation about sperm donation recently with people, and about what...
You're not automatically opted into that one, though.
No, I don't think that's retrieved post-mortem either.
Sorry, that probably got totally off piece, Joanne. Sorry. We cover all sorts on the workshop. Sorry, that was what I was just trying to... And we have it with cake, so it's always quite palatable. But
sperm donation and cake, I'm really not feeling this right. Sounds like a bad...
I'm sure this is going to be edited, don't worry.
Yeah, sorry.
No, that's definitely staying in.
I live life in colour. Not everybody that's listening can hear that I'm a colourful person, but death doesn't need to be morbid. It's obviously incredibly sad, and it's very, very traumatic and upsetting for the family. There's no getting away from it. But these are practicalities which we must start talking about more. We must start getting more comfortable with. It just needs to be a routine.
I think when you're talking about these things as well, rather than leading with death, which is obviously quite an emotive subject
Big
and scares
word.
a lot of people and they don't want to talk about it, you can always lead with the love angle. And it's how much, you want to leave that person because of the love and respect that you have for them, and you want to look after them post-death. And these are the things you want to do for them to help them through their journey, which you won't be therefore being part of any longer. So there's lots of ways I think you can deal with death, as opposed to scaring them into, oh my God, submission. I must do it because I'm,
It's the most
Sure not.
loving thing you can do. It's
It
such a
is,
gift
and I think
to your family.
lead with love, I think
Yeah.
is the message there, yeah.
And I talk
Okay.
about that with the funeral planning as well, because, you know, funerals have changed enormously over time, and particularly with COVID, we couldn't gather and people were not able to go to funerals or very small gatherings. This is where direct cremation really came into its own, and it's got a hangover now. There are still people that are choosing direct cremations because they're more affordable for families. You know, do you know what the average cost of a funeral is, Joanne? You'll know,
No.
Jason, I'm sure. No. What would you get? Hazard a guess.
3,500.
Yeah, it's over four. I think it's
Okay.
around 4,200. And you know, we've got a family bereavement at the moment, and it's gone to over 5,000 before we even get to the sort of the
The pub.
sandwiches and the crisps
I was gonna
afterwards.
say
Yeah.
that's obviously pre-wake because,
Yes.
Yeah, you know, that's
no
another one or
Uncle
two
John's there
thousand.
not at the bar, is he? So,
Yeah, and that's not even 2 hours. And so it's much moving towards you can have a direct cremation, and then afterwards, you know, 3 or 6 months down the line with the ashes, you can have a memorial service or a wake or something for you to do your goodbyes at a time where you've gathered your thoughts. It doesn't have to be time sensitive with the crematorium slot. Things are shifting. There's natural burials. Those sorts of things are becoming really popular now, particularly for younger generations, eco-friendly.
yeah.
There are, you know, it's not just burning cremations. There's hydro cremations. You don't have to be buried in a coffin. Did you know that?
Mm.
You don't have to be in a coffin. You know, there is practically nothing that you can not do at your funeral as long as it's legal. You know, it can be as wild as wonderful, and it's your last opportunity to really put your stamp on something and have that celebration of life. And I mean, funerals are more for the living. It's their opportunity to have that closure and start the grieving process. But you know, there are lots of people that plan their funeral to the nth degree and have a great
Mhm.
joy doing it, to have that
Yeah.
celebration of life, and their personality really comes out in the funeral. And you know, in amongst the tears is also the laughter, because that's the legacy that people leave. So planning your funeral doesn't have to be a really sad affair when you know that you're going to be lighting people up and still putting smiles on their faces afterwards. But it doesn't happen without planning, is what I'm trying to
Yeah.
get to. That
And
and through conversations with loved ones.
Yeah.
and Jason, is that something that happens to you? I mean, we talk about ashes and being a 6-month gap so that you can think about what you're going to do. Do people put that in their wills? And has anyone ever asked you anything really random to do with their ashes? Can I ask you that?
Yes, well, there have been the odd occasion where there's been an odd request, but it's not odd to that person. That's the odd thing about it. To that person, it's a very natural thing to request. And we mentioned, you know, the requests about being scattered on a beach in the Caribbean, which is a lovely thought, and it's a lovely way to be laid to rest. Apart from, you've got to then plan how those ashes are going to get to the Caribbean. Who's going to take them? You know, are you going to be paying for that person to have a 2-week holiday in Antigua, let's say, or are they going to have to fork it out themselves? Well, you know, it might be Brighton Beach then in that case. You know,
Yeah, if
so
it's not in the will, it's not happening.
exactly. But it's also,
Yeah.
you know, wills are, certainly when it comes to the funeral side, you know, they are funeral wishes now. So it used to be that you were very specific about what it is you could have in your. These are now regarded as wishes because, sadly, it's not now set in stone. I mean, COVID kind of brought that to everybody's foresight, really. With, you know, people were worried about burying people, and therefore certain people were getting cremated and not left on the sides to be buried. So I'd say 99.9% of the time, though, you know, these wishes are carried out without any arguments, without any hindrance at all. But funny instances, yeah, I mean, there are one or two difficult to talk about because I don't want somebody hearing it and saying, that was me.
No, that's fine. I appreciate
You can have your ashes go up in fireworks these
You
days.
send them into space. You can send them
they
into
can go to
space.
space. They can be distributed with drones over a sea. There are so many things where it's moving into, you know, a firework display with
Yeah,
mum
you
and
can
dad
send them
going
up
off
on
with
an
bang.
explosion and all sorts
Yeah.
of weird and wonderful things. You absolutely can.
Yeah,
God, people are so creative with their jobs these days. I know I'm going to design design fireworks for dead people.
Yeah. And I think Caro's dead right as well. I mean, it's a celebration of life. Yes, it's a
Yeah,
terrible
I like
thing.
that pun there, Jason.
What's that one?
You said I was
dead
dead
right.
right.
Yes, I got that as well.
Sorry.
It is a celebration, and
Yeah.
it is for the people left behind. And I've gone to many funerals. I'm at that age, sadly, where I am seeing more funerals than weddings at the moment. And I'm learning things about that person that I've known for years, 20, 30 years. And I'm thinking, oh my God, I never knew about them when they were teenagers or when they were growing up. And and it it makes you think twice about when I'm writing. I mean, it gives me hope that when I pass away, I'm going to be celebrated. And there'll be lots of things that people won't know about me. And how did I get to where I am in life? And was I always a will writer? Was I once a spaceman? Sadly not. But but I did hope to be a professional sportsman, which I never achieved. you know, as 90% of children in the 1970s and 80s growing up did, but never made it.
Yeah, I'm living with one of those as well.
Exactly. You're playing the school football team and suddenly you think you're Maradona. And, it's a real shock that you don't make it.
You've actually got to work for a living. Sorry, Caro.
Make sure you get a double slot at the crematorium, because they're jolly short these days. You usually only get like a 30-minute slot, so book a double slot, and then you'll have enough time for everybody to relay those stories.
Yeah, I do like the way that you said as well, Caro, though, about having it. Obviously the funeral needs to take place in a certain time, but I think then you can delay it for a few months to people kind of get used to the idea of you not being around, get over the emotions, stop the crying, and then get used to the celebration of it and remembering and gathering together again. Because often with a funeral, I know we're coming off the subject a little bit, but often with a funeral, it's more of a close family thing. And I think as you grow up, your extended family and your friendship base is so much wider. And sadly, sometimes your family drifts off to the sides and your friends gravitate more towards you. And that's just life, because, your nieces, nephews and that, they've got their own life to live and they're away and they're doing something, and they might now live in Australia and they can't make it back within 2 weeks of the funeral, whatever it happens to be. So I think a celebration a few months later is definitely something I'd like to look at doing as well.
But certainly,
it's really nice.
funerals are they're not actually obviously a specific funeral, but you can have a celebration of life before people pass away. We don't often know our expiry date, but for people that do know that they might be towards end of life, it is possible. I always think it's such a shame that you go to a funeral and people say, oh, he was an amazing man, and you think, oh, did you ever tell him that? All people say these amazing things at funerals, and you think, did they actually know that you thought about them like that? So
he'd have loved this.
Yeah,
that's another one, isn't it?
So I think, what about, doing some sort of service or some sort of celebration of life if people have got that, forward knowledge that they are going to be passing away in a finite period of time, to actually have that gathering and to have that moment where people can gather to say, you know what, these are all the things that we would have said afterwards, but you get to hear them. And I think that that's a lovely idea also, to celebrate someone's life, because, we don't do enough celebrating of anything. I think it's all because we're so busy. And I think that that's one of the other reasons that, people don't do more of this planning stuff and carve out time specifically for doing these really, really important things like planning for later life or unseen events. Because we are all going to die. I'm sorry. It's 100% guaranteed. It's the only certainty that we have when we come in. And it is a circle of life. We're born and we die. So we go into hospital with a birth plan. And why are we not going out with a death plan? It needs to be more commonplace. And that's what I would like to encourage people to consider. And it doesn't need to be morbid.
No, not at all. I mean, we've had a laugh, and actually it very rightly is a celebration of life. Let's just make sure that we leave it in a celebratory fashion, and without people with their head in their hands going, oh my God, the mess, because it doesn't have to be that way, as you've so both rightly explained to me. I do hope everyone has benefited greatly from this. Thank you both so much for your time. There will be links and contact and some information in the show notes for today. as I strongly believe this is information for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Lovely to be here. Thank you.
If you or someone you know has been affected by the topics discussed in this episode, support and information are available. You can visit Ocular Melanoma UK at www.omuk.org for guidance, resources, to connect with our helpline and others who understand. Remember, no one should face ocular melanoma alone.